What do you do when your dream dies? And more importantly, how do we allow God to resurrect it and actually bring to pass what He's promised to do in our lives when it feels like all hope is lost? Perhaps He has given you a promise before. You were praying about something, believing God for it. You got the promise, you're holding on to it, but it seems like that dream has died. Like it's no way possible that it can ever work out at this point. And the harder you pray and the more you believe, the worse it seems to get. What do we do when our dream dies? That is the context of John chapter 19, verse 28 through 30, which will lay the foundation for what we're going to talk about here together. It says that Jesus knew that his mission was now finished. And to fulfill scripture, he said, "I am thirsty." A jar of sour wine was sitting there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put it on a hyssop branch, and held it up to his lips. When Jesus had tasted it, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. To understand the gravity of what is happening here, we need to put the death of Jesus Christ in context from a Jewish perspective. Understand with me that the Jews had been waiting for a Messiah to come for thousands of years. All throughout the Old Testament, in the Jewish Bible and their scriptures, they were promised a Messiah who would come, who would be king, who would establish a kingdom. And then all of a sudden now, Jesus Christ is born, and many Jews begin to recognize that he actually is the Messiah. He is doing miracles, he is teaching with power and with authority, and they are believing now that finally our Messiah has come and he is going to establish the kingdom that has always been promised to us. Where they got the discrepancy a little confused was that they were assuming that he was going to set up an earthly kingdom, whereas Jesus had come to set up his spiritual kingdom. However, that religious disagreement or ideology aside, the Jews were in their context believing that Jesus was there to establish an earthly kingdom, but he gets killed. Imagine how you would feel if for generation after generation, thousands of years, you are waiting for a promise that shows up and you believe now it's finally here, and then it gets taken from you. You lose it. It's gone, and it doesn't look like there will ever be a way to get it back. I mean, they didn't know he was going to resurrect. They didn't understand what was happening. And when he does resurrect, he resurrects with a different body, so the people who saw him didn't even recognize him. I want you to notice with me 3 things that happen here that we're going to talk about in depth here together. The first is that it did not make sense to them why Jesus had to die or that he was dead. It didn't make sense. There was no way to logically reason it out and come to some kind of understanding and say, okay, I know it hurts, but this is what's going on. Like, it made no sense to them. Number 2 is that Jesus had to die for the plan to be fulfilled. The dream of having a kingdom, even though it was misunderstood at the time, in order to have it, Jesus did have to die. And then number 3, his new body did not look like what it had looked like before. So let's break each one of these down a little bit further and see if we can get some understanding that can help us right now in our context of having our dreams that have been placed before God, that he has promised us, that don't seem to be happening. Maybe we're not waiting a Messiah in a kingdom like the Jews were in that context, but maybe we're waiting for something that either hasn't shown up or it has shown up and it's died and we've lost it and it doesn't make sense, and we are wondering, what is God going to do with my dead dreams? To go further on the first point about it not making sense, I want you to remember with me the story of Lazarus. Lazarus was in a city, his family was there, he was sick, and he died. Now, where Jesus was in a different city, he had found out that Lazarus was sick, and when he's on his way after Lazarus dies and he gets there, they actually tell him, they said, had you come earlier, this wouldn't have happened. If you would have shown up on time before he died, then this would be okay. Now that you're late, he's dead. I don't really know what's going to happen now. You have to understand here that had it been done my way, is what they were telling him, then I would understand. But since you're doing things your way, God, and your ways are above my ways, and you do things that really don't make sense to me, that I don't always see the full picture, then what you're doing right now, God, doesn't make sense. That's what they were telling him. Lazarus dying made no sense. Why would Jesus even go now? That made no sense. What is he going to do? He's dead. They had never seen Jesus raise anybody from the dead at that point, right? I'm pointing out the story of Lazarus to say, like, yeah, Jesus could have done it a different way. He could have went there before Lazarus died and stopped Lazarus from ever dying in the first place. But he didn't. Sometimes when our dreams die, it will be in a context that doesn't make sense. I don't know what you're going through right now, what has happened in your life, what you've lost, what you've been promised that you haven't gotten. But I know a lot of times that God will do things in our lives. He'll promise, he'll give us encouragement after encouragement to hold on, and then it'll seem like the dream is dead. But for some reason, his ways and his timing and his plans make no sense. Sometimes I feel like, man, if I were God, I would be doing it differently. Maybe I'd be even doing it better. I know, pretty arrogant, right? But whenever you're in that situation and it makes no sense and you have nothing to hold on to, you can get to wondering sometimes, God, where are you? And why are you allowing this? Because it makes absolutely no sense. Now, with that being said, not only, remember, did Jesus' death make no sense, as is our dreams dying, but the second point I brought out is that Jesus actually had to die in order for the dream to come to pass. I want to share a little story with you to illustrate this point. All my life as a high school student, I wanted to become a high school teacher. I had a Spanish teacher who was just a really solid man and influenced me quite a bit and was pivotal in my life at that time for me getting involved in the things of God and wanting to go to college and getting off of drugs and just transitioning my life. Although he wasn't a Christian and in my church at the time, he just was such a solid man. I respected him so much. I actually got to see him 2 weeks ago. I went visit in his country in El Salvador and got to spend the afternoon with him and his wife. It was wonderful to go and visit with them. But anyways, he left an impact in my life. And I wanted to be a teacher. And I wanted to be a teacher in that school because that's where he was a teacher at, right? And that's where I had graduated from. So I go to college for 5 years to get my 2 degrees, finish college, and I go back to the school to get a job there. And the principal doesn't want to hire me. I'm too young. I'm not certified as a teacher at this time. I have no experience. There's not even an opening in the school for an English teacher, and that's what my degree was in. And so it wasn't working out. Well, my then Spanish teacher when I was in high school was now the assistant principal, and although he wasn't able to hire me since he wasn't the principal, he was able to vouch for me and tried to get me into the school, telling the lead principal, hey, I really think he would do a good job. Well, anyway, long story short, I got into the school and I worked out the rest of the school year, but then I wasn't brought back the second year. And the school board called me right before the following school year and asked if I would go to a school on the other side of town and teach at the junior high. And I accepted it. I went, and it was a great experience. I had a lot of really cool relationships. I met parents and all the students. But deep inside in my heart, I wanted to be back at the old high school. Well, I taught there that year at the junior high. The next year, again, I taught at the junior high. And then at the end of the year, it got really, really bad. I had a horrible experience between me and the assistant principal, and some things went in completely horrible directions, and I was actually completely fired from the job. She ended up fabricating all kind of crazy stuff. Long story short, I was fired from the job, and I was told by the school board that I would never work in that parish again. Well, we left, we went home, prayed about it, and I called a friend of mine who was connected with the school board at the time, and talked to him and explained to him what happened, and ended up getting let back in to the school board in that school system because the truth was revealed. And when that happened, not only was I let back in, I was put in at the high school that I wanted to teach at the original school where I always had wanted to be. Now, I'm saying that to tell you this. When I got fired, when I lost everything, my teaching career, that was devastating. It was the mark of my 1-year anniversary. They fired me. I went home, picked up my wife. We drove to Florida to celebrate our 1-year anniversary, knowing that I had no job or career to come back to. It was devastating. We fought the whole time. We were scared. We were frustrated. We felt like it was such an injustice. It was a whole fiasco. I'd have never, ever gotten back to the high school had my career not died. Had I not lost something, I would have never gained something. The whole fiasco and the frustration and the fear and the injustice and the lies and the slander, like all of that I had to go through, the embarrassment, all of it led to me having exactly what I wanted, which was the dream job, the career in the school that I wanted to be at. It all fell into place, but not without a death, not without losing something. Could it be that your dream has died because something needed to die in order for the fullness of the dream that God gave you to really come to pass in your life? Is it not necessarily a complete death, but only a transition of what was to what God really has for you? You see, sometimes in order to walk into the fullness and everything of what God has for us, what we currently have has to die. That being said, now, is there something in your life that you're holding out on, hoping like that it would just not be this way? It doesn't make sense, but now also you've lost it and it's a dead situation. Could it be that all God is doing is letting something get buried because right around the corner, what he has planned for you is a resurrection of your dreams? If that's so, I want to continue taking you on this journey. If there's any hope in you that could be the case, and talk about this last little third point that we mentioned back with the story of Jesus dying on the cross, and that being that when he resurrected, he had a body, but it wasn't what his old body looked like. It wasn't the same. In fact, it was so different and he looked so different that unless he opened their eyes to see it was him, when people who knew him in his lifetime saw him in his resurrected body, they did not even know that it was Jesus. So, that being said, could it be that when God gives you your dream, he will give it to you, but it's not going to look like you always thought it would look? Is it going to happen in a way that you didn't expect? Is it going to come from a person that you didn't think it would come from? Is it going to happen in God's way, even if that way is different from our way? Look at the story of Joseph, who had a dream that his brothers and father-in-law would bow down to him, and he really thought he was gonna become somebody right there in Israel. But what happened is his brothers got jealous and sold him into slavery, and they take him now off to Egypt, and then he's serving in somebody's house who's second in command in the nation, and then the man's wife tries to sleep with Joseph, and Joseph denies her, and so she lies on him and says that he raped her, and so they take him and put him in prison, and he's left there and forgotten about for 13 years. Where is his dream at that point? I'll tell you where it is. It's in the hand of God and in the plans of God. And even though Joseph didn't get his dream fulfilled the way he thought he would, back whenever he was a young child, thinking, or teenager, young man, getting the dream, thinking that his parents and his brothers and everyone would follow his leadership back in Israel, what happens is he ends up interpreting a dream for the president of Egypt, and that man, the president, takes him out of jail, makes him second in line in the entire kingdom, and he begins to lead with his administrative leadership giftings. And then eventually a famine in Israel sends his old family, his old brothers and his dad all out to the land of Egypt, where they come before him and ask for grain. So his dream is fulfilled, but it is not fulfilled the way he thought it would be. You might get exactly what you've been praying for, and it might happen, but it might not happen exactly the way you thought it would. Be open to God's changes and his shiftings and his timing and what it is that he actually wants to do, because he's given you a dream and you have that desire and there's a purpose attached to it, but he doesn't give you all the details. Sometimes we get that dream and then we interpret it of how it needs to be and when it needs to happen and exactly how it's all going to pan out, but then none of it works out that way. That's okay. It's okay if you have a dream that's died and it doesn't make sense. It's okay if you have a dream that has completely been taken from you and it's dead at this point. And it's okay if when it's resurrected and God does the work in your life, that it does happen. It just might happen in a way that you didn't expect it to.